I could still clearly remember what he looked like, even if I only saw him for a few seconds. He was wearing a charcoal black suit along with a tall hat while feeling the ground with a walking stick. However, the outdated style of his clothes was not what made the blind man stand out from the crowd. He had this strange presence that grabbed my attention while I was looking from the other side of the road. My friend Jenna was enthusiastically waving her hand at me, but my focus was completely taken by the man who simply walked by behind her. My eyes followed his tracks while Jenna was crossing the road, and then the bystanders screamed after the sound of a loud thud. Jenna suddenly lost her sight in the middle of the road and got hit by a car. A few hours after the accident, this strange incident spread all over the news as more people went blind for no apparent reason. Ophthalmologists from different clinics were summoned to identify the reason for this sudden blindness, but none of them were able to find the cause. There was no retinal damage, nor any other observable causes for the victim's sudden visual impairment. Oddly enough, all of the diagnoses claimed that none of them displayed any symptoms prior to losing their sight. The most plausible explanation for going blind in such a short amount of time was a head trauma or any physical damage to the eyes, but all of them were physically fine before and after they went blind. One of the victims reported that he was just having coffee in a diner when he lost his vision completely, but there were others who went blind in a very ill-timed manner. Like my friend, some individuals were in the middle of a dangerous task when it happened. Regrettably, suddenly losing their sight had caused some accidents to them and to the people around them. One of the more unfortunate cases was of a forklift operator. A freak accident in a cargo warehouse was reported when the operator rammed the forklift to the shelves. He lost his sight while he was driving. The shelves collapsed and the piles of cargo crashed on the people on site. Aside from the operator, 11 people were severely injured, while 5 employees had died on the spot. At that point, all the information and updates about this odd phenomenon were televised to warn the people. Based on their statements, all of the victims were experiencing the worst kind of complete blindness, which was already rare for those that were visually impaired. In most cases, blind people could still detect some light or color in front of them. The victims' descriptions about their peculiar vision impairment were matched. They said that there was nothing they could see but pitch black. There were no spots, shades, nor blurriness at all. Everything was just an endless void that surrounded them. Perhaps it was due to this complete absence of light, which they were all not accustomed to, that the victims were also experiencing paranoia. They said that they always had this uneasy feeling of being watched, even though they were alone in the room. In worse cases, some patients would suddenly scream out of nowhere. They said that they felt something terrifying, but couldn't point out what exactly it was. They couldn't describe it as anything else but a haunting presence lurking in the dark. But the presence was so close, as if it was right next to them. Aside from these strange episodes, there was another unusual similarity in the victims' statements. When asked what they could remember before they lost their vision, they all described a blind man wearing a black suit and a tall hat. They asked them to describe his face, but none of them were able to recall his facial features. It was the same person that I saw before Jenna died. When I tried to remember what he looked like, I couldn't recall his face either. Everything about him was easy to remember. However, his face, which should be the first thing we think about when remembering someone, was but a blur to me. 5 days later, more people from different places suddenly lost their sight as well. In less than a week, the total number of victims was already 112. The media began to call it the void phenomena, and more people were catching up to it. Eye clinics were on high demand. They were being flooded by waves of patients with the same unexplainable case of complete blindness. They were all describing the same thing, including their encounter with the blind man in a black suit. People were advised to look out for the person with this description, but nobody was still able to remember what his face looked like. The authorities began to conduct an investigation to find him, but they didn't have much lead to go on. They were suspecting that this man might be spreading some type of new virus that was blinding people, but this was nothing but a wild speculation. Including the eye doctors, a lot of people questioned the existence of the blind man. The specialists stated that it was nearly impossible to turn someone completely blind in a way which the victims had described. Aside from the fact that not a single one of them could remember the suspect's face, none of them had any kind of physical contact with him either. If it was indeed a newly invented virus, then more people within the area should have been affected as well. The distance between the reported victims were also too far apart. According to the reports, there were consecutive cases that happened in less than an hour. He would have to travel roughly 150 miles within 30 minutes to get to his next victim, which was virtually impossible. Not to mention that the unidentified suspect was said to be a blind man. There were simply too many questionable factors regarding the suspect. If I hadn't seen him with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed in his existence either. The investigators were doing what they could to find out if he was real or not, but several speculations were already spreading across different media platforms. Including myself, spectators had strong opinions about the matter. The authority was struggling to connect the dots since they were trying to make sense of a case that was paranormal in nature. After a couple of days, the investigation about the void phenomena finally had progress. In one incident where a person suddenly lost their sight, it was caught by a security camera installed nearby. Unexpectedly, the record also captured the blind man in black suit. The doubt about his existence were cleared, but the paranormal aspect of the case also became more apparent. In the recorded video, the blind man just disappeared into thin air. The number of victims had also reached 254. People were already terrified to go outside of their houses, and random blind people wearing black suits were taken in for questioning without any evident proof. As expected, none of them was the man in the video. However, one of them claimed that he saw the person they were looking for. But aside from the fact that he himself was visually impaired, the way he described him was quite perplexing. He was a homeless beggar who appeared to be around the area where a victim was turned blind. This statement from the blind beggar that they brought in for questioning was so strange that the investigators chose not to disclose it to the public. Regardless of whether it was true or not, the statement eventually got leaked online. Despite the beggar's extremely blurred sight that could only see a faint light, he claimed that he was able to see the man in black suit very clearly. In fact, he was the only clear subject in his line of sight, which made him really stand out. The beggar said that he wasn't able to see anything clear for decades, and so he remembered the appearance of the person very well, even though he only passed by him in just a few seconds. When he described the suspect's facial features, it was when things got even stranger. He said that the man had a slender physique, and his skin was unnaturally pale. He didn't have visible lips, and his nose was long and tall. He said that the man in the black suit was struggling to see, because he was blinded by the brightness. It appeared as if he was in pain and in a hurry. He was hiding his eyes under the shade of his tall hat while he was walking, and the beggar said that he was taken aback when he had a glimpse of it. The mysterious man's eyes were all black and set so deep that he almost looked like a bear's skull if not for his ears and nose. Right there and then, he realized that the man in black suit was not an ordinary human. He claimed that he might not even be human at all. The leaked statement stirred a lot of discussion within different online communities. Some people immediately concluded that the statement was fake, while others tried to break down every part of it. A member in one of the forums was able to locate and meet the homeless beggar, and he was able to verify that the statement was indeed his. However, he denied it when more people tried to reach out to him and discuss the matter even further. His inconsistent responses made a lot of people doubt him even more. There was also this obvious question about how a visually impaired man would suddenly be able to see. On the other hand, there were also those who believed that he was ordered not to say anything further about what he saw. Many people did not trust the mainstream media and the government about these matters, and it could be said that they purposely tried to bury the topic completely. Ever since they revealed the video record of the blind man in the black suit, they no longer released any significant update about the case. It was easy to think that the government just decided to hide what they discovered when the discussions about this controversial topic were deliberately shunned from the big network stations. However, what happened next made the matter too hard to ignore. The void phenomena resurfaced to the eyes of the public once again when the victims were hit by another sudden disability. If losing their sight was not bad enough yet, the victims also began to lose their sense of hearing. Different media networks rushed to the families and hospitals when all of the 254 blind individuals were suddenly experiencing profound deafness. A number of ear specialists were quite dumbfounded when they ran their diagnosis. Although all of them completely failed to respond to the hearing tests, the otolaryngologists found no visible damage in their auditory system. They all became deaf with no possible cause. The people suspected that this was also part of the void phenomena. Just as some of them were starting to get used to their total blindness, they were faced once again with another difficult challenge. With complete blindness and total silence, we assumed that a lot of the victims would fall into depression. Some of their relatives were actively participating in online forums since they were also desperate to find the cause of the void phenomena, and we were getting updates about the case directly from them. After a couple of days since they lost their hearing, the victims appeared to have lost all hope as well. They completely stopped responding to the people around them. They refused to talk, eat, drink, or even bathe. Those who were caring for the victims wanted to find a way to lessen their misery. However, the situation wasn't as simple as they thought. A father of one victim described his blind and deaf daughter as a lifeless doll. He said that she had a far-gazed look in her eyes while drooling. He pinched and slapped her face a couple of times in an attempt to get a reaction, but his daughter remained unfazed. He was constantly checking her pulse just to make sure that she was still alive. He also reached out to the other families who had the same situation. Apparently, the other victims were also completely motionless for some reason. One user in a forum told him that her daughter and the others were not depressed nor dying. The victims were in a state of trance. On the following day, the father told us that his daughter finally moved. However, she began to show some strange behavior. He said that his daughter was turning her head back and forth, as if she was looking around despite being blind. It also seemed as if she was talking to someone that wasn't there, and that wasn't the strangest part of it. The father claimed that her daughter was speaking a language that he had never heard of. Several users in the forum didn't believe what he was saying, and so he decided to share a small video clip of his daughter. Just like how he described, the victim was walking around the room while he was preventing her from bumping into things. With a curious look on her face, it looked like she was seeing something else around them instead of the room. She was talking to someone with a different language as well. This short clip was shared in different social media platforms, and it reached a few local network stations. They asked the father if they could show the video on air, but he refused. He feared that her daughter might get ridiculed. The clip was still spread around without his consent, and he was very upset about it. I was still mourning for Jenna, but I also felt that I was lucky somehow. With everything that was happening to the victims of this so-called void phenomena, I couldn't help but feel as if I dodged a bullet when I saw the man in black suit, but still managed to keep my sight. However, my heart was crushed when my cousin unexpectedly showed up in front of my apartment. My aunt was trying to call me several times, but she couldn't reach me since I changed my number. He asked the help of my cousin Glenn, whom I haven't seen for years, and he tracked me down for several days. Unfortunately, my mother was also a victim of the mysterious blind man. She was staying with her at the time, and my mother called out to her when she lost her sight while she was in the garden. Mother convinced her not to contact me because she didn't want me to get worried. Just like the other victims, she eventually lost her sense of hearing as well. When she reached the state of trance, my aunt asked Glenn to look for me since she thought that my mother might be dying. By the time he found me, Mother was already behaving strangely. My aunt was unaware that this behavior was part of the void phenomena, and so she thought that my mother was losing her sanity. As I watched her wandering aimlessly inside the room like a lost child, I cried when I realized that I was such an irresponsible son. I felt so useless. Even if I was already there with her, there was nothing I could do to help her. My aunt and I were trying to restrain my mother so she wouldn't hit the wall and the shelves. She was doing exactly the same thing that I saw in the video clip of the daughter. Mother was still unaware that I was there since her senses were in a different place. As time went by, her actions grew more aggressive. She was only walking around the room when I arrived. But now, she was already running and bumping at the tables on the following day. Mother had a very worried look on her face. I couldn't understand what she was saying, but I could tell that she was starting to panic. Whatever it was that she was seeing, it was obvious that she was trying to hide from it. On the 4th day of my stay, it was then when her strange behavior finally reached its peak. In the middle of the night, Mother suddenly screamed at the top of her lungs. She was looking up at the ceiling, but I knew that she was seeing something different. My aunt and I were trying to hold her down to her bed, since she was already swinging her arms and legs quite violently. I kept on calling out her name, but she still wasn't responding to me. A few minutes later, my mother's eyes widened as she pointed to the sky. With a language that we could finally understand, she kept on repeating, "It's here, it's here." She looked extremely terrified by whatever it was that she was seeing. She strode her legs as if she was desperately trying to run away. After a few minutes of full panic, Mother coiled her body like a child and covered her head with both arms. Her entire body was shaking out of absolute terror while she cried out in shrill in agony. I never imagined that I would see my mother in such a state. I was crying my heart out while we were putting all our weight against her to keep her in place. When she cowered in fear, I held her tight, and all I could do was cry with her. Out of exhaustion, my mother passed out. On the following day, my aunt and I were shocked when she turned her head to us when we spoke to her. We were overjoyed when she regained her sense of sight and hearing. However, Mother was still in shock because of whatever it was that she saw. She did not speak the entire day, and we let her have her peace. I checked the forum to see if the other victims also experienced the same intensity of panic during that night. Apparently, some of them had it far worse. There were others who broke their bones as they desperately tried to free themselves from the restraints of their loved ones, and there were family members who got hurt as well. One of the victims who managed to break free smashed his head on the wall while running at full speed. He fractured his skull and was sent to the hospital immediately. Just like Mother, they also got their senses back the morning after. When my mother was finally in the mood to speak, she hugged me tight and apologized for getting me very worried. I prepared her a hefty meal since she didn't eat enough for days. If my aunt didn't force feed her at the time when she was completely unresponsive, she would have died of hunger. A few moments later, she decided to tell me what she saw. Apparently, the truth behind the void phenomena was far more appalling than anyone could have imagined. The blind man in the black suit was an emissary, and his goal was to make people aware about their existence before they perish. This being was from a different world, but their world was not that far from ours. The emissary had the ability to transport a person's awareness to their world by using their own people as hosts. Unfortunately, he could only transport a few hundreds. He did not turn the people blind. It was their world itself that was completely devoid of light. When the individuals he chose to transport thought that they were surrounded by darkness, they were already seeing through the eyes of their people. Transporting senses had 3 phases. First would be the sight, and then the hearing, and the last would be the consciousness. As days passed, those who were chosen would finally adjust to their world. They would begin to see in the dark. They would begin to hear, speak, and use the body of the host as if it was their own. At the time when the presumed victims became unresponsive, they were already in the process of transition. In order to keep their real bodies active, they would have to behave in the same way as they move in the other world. The blind man in black suit and a tall hat was the only host that the emissary managed to acquire from the human world. Since this man was long gone, he could only suspend its existence in time for a very brief moment before the laws of nature apply. If he stayed for too long, the body would instantly rot and decay. Coincidentally, the humans who were used to living in the dark would be able to see them. On the other hand, those with complete senses would have their perceptions altered. The reason why nobody could remember the emissary's face was because he made it unperceivable to the naked eyes of humans. And there was a very good reason for this level of cautiousness. Even though their world was covered in darkness, Mother described it as the most sincere and peaceful place that she had ever been. When her eyes finally adjusted, a very beautiful world unfolded right before her. The structures were made of transparent materials and gigantic domes were erected on a single beam. She also saw fantastical creatures that were coexisting peacefully with the people. She deeply regretted not having enough time to explore their world a bit further. At the time when my mother's consciousness was transported, it was only a day away before the destruction. The people who lived in the dark knew that they would soon be extinguished, and the last thing that they could do was to make other living beings know that they once existed. On the night when I saw Mother cowering in fear while covering her head in both arms, it was when the complete annihilation of their kind was taking place. At first, I thought that they were extinguished by nature, such as a large meteor or a great flood. However, my mother suddenly cast her eyes down, as if she was still in disbelief. Apparently, what came down from the sky that lit up their entire world in a blink of an eye was a nuclear bomb that was made and sent by mankind. The world, or more particularly, a small group of people in our world, knew about them. The ones who erased their existence were our kind. Perhaps they saw them as a threat, or maybe they had other reasons. But to commit total annihilation of another civilization is unbelievable.